The town of Hollow Creek was quiet, too quiet. The harvest moon, fat and orange, hung low in the sky. It cast long, eerie shadows across the fields. The corn stalks, tall and dry, swayed like phantoms in the night breeze. And the scarecrows, silent sentinels stuffed with straw and menace. Their hollow eyes seemed to watch, always watching, waiting. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and dying leaves. Autumn had come to Hollow Creek, and with it the promise of something sinister. Old Man Hemlock sat on his porch, rocking slowly. The creak of the wooden chair was the only sound in the stillness of the evening. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the distant call of an owl. Hemlock's eyes, though clouded with age, still held a sharpness that belied his years. He'd seen many things in his long life, but the tales of the Scarecrow Demon always sent a shiver down his spine. He'd seen more harvest moons than he could count. Each one brought with it a sense of foreboding, a reminder of the stories his own grandfather had told him. Stories of a demon that walked the earth under the harvest moon, seeking out the innocent to claim their souls, more than he cared to remember. Each year, as the nights grew longer and the shadows deeper, the whispers would start. Whispers of children gone missing, of strange figures seen in the fields at dusk. Hemlock had always dismissed them as mere tales, but deep down he knew there was truth to them. He sucked on his pipe, the embers glowing like malevolent eyes in the darkness. The smoke curled around him, a protective shroud against the encroaching night. He muttered to himself, the words barely audible, "The Scarecrow Demon takes him." His voice was a dry rasp, filled with the weight of years and the burden of knowledge. "The Scarecrow Demon takes him," he muttered, his voice a dry rasp. The children of Hollow Creek knew the stories. They'd heard them from their parents, who had heard them from theirs. Each generation adding their own details, their own fears. The stories were a part of the town's fabric, woven into the very essence of their lives. The children of Hollow Creek knew the stories. They gathered around campfires, their faces lit by the flickering flames, listening with wide eyes and bated breath. The tales were always the same, yet each telling brought a fresh wave of fear. Whispered warnings passed down through generations. Whispered warnings passed down through generations. The Scarecrow Demon, they said, was a creature of the night, a being of pure malevolence. It walked the earth under the harvest moon, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. It sought out the innocent, those whose souls were untainted by the world's darkness, a demon that walked the earth under the harvest moon. It moved silently through the fields, its presence heralded by the rustling of the corn and the whisper of the wind. The Scarecrow, once a benign guardian of the crops, became a symbol of dread, its tattered clothes and hollow eyes a reminder of the demon's power. A demon that stole the souls of the innocent and took their forms. The stories told of children who vanished, only to return as hollow shells of their former selves. Their eyes, once bright with life, now dull and empty. The demon, it was said, could mimic their voices, their mannerisms, but it could never replicate their souls. This year the whispers were louder, more insistent, more afraid. The harvest moon was approaching, and with it the fear that the Scarecrow Demon would return. The villagers spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting to the fields, to the shadows that seemed to grow longer with each passing day. Old Man Hemlock knew that this year would be different. This year the demon would come for him. The first Scarecrow vanished on the eve of the harvest moon. It was gone, leaving behind only an empty suit of clothes and the faintest whiff of decay. Then another, and another. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through the whispers. The townsfolk, hardened by generations of farming and hardship, looked at their children with suspicion. They locked their doors at night. But it wasn't the living they feared, it was the dead. The night the Scarecrows returned, the air was thick with an unsettling stillness. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something dreadful to unfold. The fields, usually so full of life, seemed to wither under the oppressive darkness. The moon hung blood-red in the sky. It cast an eerie glow over the landscape, bathing everything in a sinister crimson light. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying, a harbinger of the horrors to come. A storm raged, wind howling like a banshee, rain lashing the earth. The storm seemed almost alive, a malevolent force intent on wreaking havoc. And then silence, an unnatural, suffocating silence that pressed down on the town like a heavy shroud. The townsfolk held their breath, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew something was coming, something terrible. They could feel it in their bones, a primal fear that gripped them and refused to let go. Listening for the screams they knew were coming. The air was thick with tension, every creak and rustle amplified in the oppressive silence. They waited, dreading the moment when the night would be shattered by the sound of terror. They found the first one at dawn. Not a scarecrow anymore. No, something else, something twisted, something evil. Its form was grotesque, a perversion of the familiar figure that once stood guard over the fields. Now it was a harbinger of doom. It stood in the town square, a silent sentinel of horror. The townsfolk gathered around it, their faces pale with fear and disbelief. How could something so familiar become so terrifying? Its burlap face contorted in a grotesque mockery of a smile. In its outstretched hand, it held a symbol of innocence, corrupted. The sight was enough to send shivers down the spine of even the bravest soul. It clutched a child's doll. The doll's once bright eyes were now dull and lifeless, a reflection of the horror that had befallen the town. It was a chilling reminder of the innocence lost in the face of such malevolence. Its once empty eye sockets burned with a cold, malevolent fire. The flames seemed to flicker with a life of their own, a sinister intelligence that watched and waited. The townsfolk could only stare in horror, knowing that this was just the beginning. The killings were swift, brutal. The once peaceful cornfields, bathed in the golden hues of sunset, had turned into a nightmarish landscape. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of the cornstalks, as if whispering secrets of the horrors they had witnessed. The scarecrows, no longer protectors of the fields, became instruments of death. Their once benign presence, meant to ward off pests, had transformed into something malevolent. The glow in their eyes was not just a trick of the light, but a sinister gleam that hinted at the dark forces animating them. Their straw-stuffed limbs, animated by something dark and ancient, moved with terrifying speed and precision. Each movement was deliberate, each strike calculated. It was as if they were driven by an insatiable hunger for blood, a thirst that could never be quenched. The fields, once a symbol of life and growth, had become a hunting ground for these twisted creations. They found little Timmy Henderson in the cornfield, his body impaled on a broken fence post. The sight was gruesome, a stark reminder of the innocence lost. Timmy, who once played joyfully among the cornstalks, had become a victim of the very scarecrows he once found amusing. The scarecrows had used his blood to paint the cornstalks a horrifying shade of crimson. The vibrant red stood out starkly against the green and gold of the field, a macabre artwork that spoke of unspeakable violence. It was as if the scarecrows were sending a message, a warning to all who dared to enter their domain. They found Mary Sue Patterson in her own bed, her tiny body torn limb from limb. The bedroom, once a sanctuary of childhood dreams, had become a scene of unimaginable horror. The walls, once adorned with cheerful drawings, were now splattered with blood, a testament to the brutality that had taken place. Her blood had been used to write a single chilling word on the wall, mine. The word, scrawled in a child's innocent handwriting, was a haunting declaration of possession. It was as if the scarecrows were claiming their victims, marking them as their own in a twisted ritual of blood and terror. The once peaceful town was now gripped by fear, its residents haunted by the knowledge that the scarecrows were no longer mere guardians of the fields, but harbingers of death. The screams began at nightfall, horrific soul-rending cries that echoed through the empty streets of Hollow Creek. Mothers clutched their children, their faces pale with terror. Fathers gripped shotguns, their knuckles white with fear. But there was nothing they could do. The scarecrows moved like phantoms through the night, their laughter, cold and hollow, echoing through the streets. The morning after the storm, the townsfolk emerged from their homes, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and terror. The whispers were gone, replaced by screams of anguish. The bodies of their children, mutilated beyond recognition, lay scattered throughout the town like fallen dolls. The harvest moon demon had come for their children, and it had left its mark. The townsfolk, fueled by rage and despair, rose up. They grabbed their pitchforks, their axes, their shotguns. They would have their revenge. They hunted the scarecrows down one by one, burning them in the streets, the air thick with the smell of burning straw and vengeance. But with each scarecrow they destroyed, a chilling truth settled in their hearts. The demon wasn't gone. It was merely biding its time, waiting for the next harvest moon, waiting for its chance to rise again. As the sun rose, casting long shadows over the charred remains of the scarecrows, a single crow cawed overhead. The harvest moon had set. The killing season was over, for now. But the townsfolk of Hollow Creek knew, deep in their bones, that the demon was still out there. Somewhere in the shadows it waited, and it would be back. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the desolate highway. A lone car, a vintage Mustang, its chrome glinting like a fading dream, sped down the empty road. Inside, the traveler, a man with eyes that held the weight of the world, gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white as bone. He was a man on a mission, a man running from something, or perhaps towards it. The sky deepened into a bruised purple, the air growing heavy with the promise of a storm. Up ahead, a sign emerged from the gloom, barely visible in the fading light. "Welcome to Silent Hollow," it proclaimed in faded paint. The letters twisted and gnarled like the branches of a dead oak. A shiver ran down the traveler's spine, a primal instinct telling him to turn back. But something drew him forward, a morbid curiosity, a need to confront the unknown. He pressed down on the accelerator, urging the Mustang onward, deeper into the heart of the coming night. As he crossed the town line, the last rays of sunlight vanished, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Silent Hollow awaited. The town was shrouded in an unnatural stillness. The houses perched on the side of the road like watchful crows were dark, their windows vacant eyes staring out at the stranger. The only light came from a flickering neon sign above a rundown diner, Rosie's, open 24 hours. The traveler pulled the Mustang to a stop in front of the diner, the engine sputtering its last. He stepped out onto the cracked asphalt, the silence pressing in on him like a physical weight. He could hear his own heartbeat, a frantic drumbeat in his ears. He was tired, hungry, and suddenly very alone. Taking a deep breath, he walked towards the diner, the flickering neon sign casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed on the pavement. As he approached the diner, he noticed movement in the shadows across the street. A figure, tall and slender, stood motionless, its face obscured by the darkness. He was being observed, scrutinized, judged. He pushed open the diner door, the hinges groaning in protest. The diner was empty, devoid of the usual comforting clatter of dishes and murmur of conversation. He moved towards the counter, his boots thudding on the checkered floor. He took a seat on a worn red stool, the vinyl creaking beneath him. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the empty space. A sudden clatter from the back startled him, breaking the spell of silence. The diner, once a beacon of warmth, now felt like a trap. A figure emerged from the back, a woman, her face etched with a lifetime of unspoken stories. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost mechanical. She moved with an eerie grace, like a marionette controlled by unseen hands. Her eyes, dark and fathomless, met his, and for a fleeting moment he felt a connection. She didn't speak. Instead, her hands moved, her fingers dancing through a series of intricate gestures. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I don't understand," he rasped. She gestured towards the empty stool beside him, her movements fluid and precise. He hesitated, his gut screaming at him to run, but something in her eyes, A flicker of vulnerability held him captive. He slid onto the stool, his body tense. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. She reached beneath the counter and produced a worn notepad and a stubby pencil. Her long, slender fingers, tipped with chipped red nail polish, pushed the notepad towards him. He picked up the pencil, determined to find his voice. He scribbled on the notepad, "Why is it so quiet?" The woman read it, her face impassive. She wrote back, "Silence keeps us safe." He stared at the words, their simplicity doing little to quell the unease. "Safe from what?" He wrote again, pressing the pencil harder. She wrote back, "Don't speak of it, not here." He felt a chill course through him. The diner, once seemingly innocuous, now felt oppressive. He pushed the notepad back to her. "Tell me," he insisted. Her eyes met his, wide with a fear that mirrored his own. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence. The woman flinched, her eyes widening in terror. She sprang from her stool, her gaze fixed on something beyond the diner's dusty windows. He followed her gaze, his heart pounding. A procession of townsfolk, their faces pale and drawn, marched down the deserted street. They carried torches, the flickering flames casting grotesque shadows. At the center of the procession, a young woman, her white dress stained crimson, stumbled forward. He watched in horrified fascination, his mind struggling to comprehend the scene. The woman beside him let out a choked sob, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of fear and resignation, met his. He saw in them a reflection of his own growing horror. He wanted to look away, but something held him captive. As he watched, the world around him seemed to distort, the edges of reality blurring. He realized with a sickening certainty that this was not the first time this ritual had played out. He was caught in a loop, a repeating nightmare from which there was no escape. He had to get out. He grabbed the woman's arm, his grip tight, insistent. "We have to go," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She stared at him, her eyes wide, uncomprehending. He pulled her towards the diner door, his heart hammering. He threw open the door, a rush of cold night air hitting him. He pulled her after him into the darkness. He ran, pulling the woman along with him, their footsteps echoing on the deserted street. The streetlights flickered, casting erratic shadows. Buildings groaned and shifted, their facades rippling. The air, thick with the stench of fear and decay, pressed in around him. He dragged the woman along, her hand cold and clammy in his grasp. Her eyes, wide with terror, darted from side to side. The houses, once neatly arranged, now pressed in on them. Each building seemed to pulse with a life of its own. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw the torchlight procession drawing closer. He veered into a narrow alleyway, pulling the woman after him. The darkness here was absolute, swallowing the weak moonlight. The air hung heavy, thick with the stench of mildew and decay. He pressed himself and the woman against the rough brick, his heart pounding. He held his breath, listening, waiting for any sign that they had been followed. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the sound of their own ragged breathing. The alley twisted and turned, a labyrinth designed to confuse and disorient. He stumbled over unseen obstacles, his hands scraping against rough brick and rotting wood. He opened his eyes, his gaze drawn to a faint light flickering at the end of the alleyway. Hope, fragile and fleeting, flickered in his chest. Was it an exit? A way out of this nightmare? Or was it another trick of the town, a lure to draw him deeper into its clutches? He tightened his grip on the woman's hand and cautiously made his way towards the light, his footsteps echoing softly in the oppressive silence. As they drew closer, he realized the light emanated from a small window, its glass cracked and grimy. He peered cautiously through the window, his heart sinking as he took in the scene before him. The room beyond the window was sparsely furnished, its walls bare except for faded wallpaper that hung in tattered strips. In the center of the room, a single candle flickered on a rickety table, casting long dancing shadows that stretched across the floor. But it was the figures huddled in the corner that made his blood run cold. They were townsfolk, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes reflecting a chilling mixture of fear and resignation. They huddled together, their bodies trembling, their lips moving in silent pleas. He realized with a sickening certainty that they were prisoners, trapped in this nightmare just like him, condemned to relive this nightmarish cycle for eternity. He watched as the figures in the room performed a series of strange, ritualistic movements, their bodies swaying in unison with the distant chanting that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. Their eyes were glazed over, vacant, as if their souls had already fled their bodies, leaving behind empty shells. He watched, mesmerized and horrified, as one by one the figures stepped forward, offering their wrists to a shadowy figure he couldn't quite make out in the flickering candlelight. He saw the glint of a blade, heard the soft thud of bodies hitting the floor, smelled the coppery tang of blood that filled the air, thick and cloying. He realized with a sickening certainty that he was witnessing the source of the town's silence, the terrible price the townsfolk paid for their existence. They were trapped in a macabre cycle of sacrifice and silence, their lives forfeit to appease some ancient malevolent force that held sway over Silent Hollow. He tore his gaze away from the gruesome scene, his stomach churning with a mixture of fear and revulsion. He had stumbled upon a truth too terrible to comprehend, a darkness that threatened to consume him entirely. He knew then that he wasn't just trapped in Silent Hollow, he was trapped by its terrible secret. Section 5, No Dawn for the Lost. A hand clamped down on his shoulder, its grip vice-like. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. It was the woman, her eyes wide with a terrifying intensity. She was no longer the meek, frightened figure he had encountered. Something had shifted within her, a spark of defiance igniting in her eyes. She pointed a finger at him, her expression fierce, her hand moved in rapid, frantic gestures. She was warning him, telling him he didn't understand the horror. He opened his mouth to speak, but she clamped a hand over it. Her eyes, filled with fear and urgency, darted towards the street. He could hear the chanting growing louder, closer. They were running out of time. He saw the torchlight procession turning into the alleyway. They were trapped, hunted by something ancient and evil. There would be no escape from Silent Hollow, no dawn to break the night. The flickering torchlight flooded the alleyway, momentarily blinding him. He shielded his eyes, the woman's grip tightening on his arm. The chanting swelled, echoing off the brick walls, a cacophony of voices twisted into a grotesque symphony of fear and fervor. He caught glimpses of the townsfolk as they marched past the alley's entrance. Their faces, illuminated by the flickering flames, were masks of blind obedience, their eyes vacant, their movements mechanical. The air grew heavy, thick with the stench of sweat, incense, and something ancient, something undeniably sinister. Panic welled up inside him, a primal scream trapped in his throat. He had to get out, had to find a way to escape the suffocating grip of the town and its horrifying ritual. But the alley seemed to stretch endlessly before him, the exit nothing more than a distant glimmer in a sea of encroaching darkness. The woman pulled at his arm, her eyes wide with urgency. She understood the danger, the futility of resistance. This was her world, a world governed by ancient laws, by a pact sealed in blood and silence. She knew there was no escape, only acceptance of the inevitable. He felt a strange pull, a force drawing him towards the chanting, towards the heart of the ritual. He tried to resist, to dig in his heels, but his body moved against his will, pulled forward as if by invisible strings. He was a puppet, his fate no longer his own. The chanting grew louder, swirling around him, seeping into his mind, his thoughts. He felt his own fear, his own terror, feeding the energy of the ritual, fueling its power. He was caught in a vortex of darkness, spiraling down into the heart of the town's ancient, terrible secret. He stumbled, his legs heavy, his head spinning. He looked down and saw the woman beside him, her eyes closed, her lips moving in a silent prayer. She had accepted her fate, embraced the darkness that enveloped them both. He envied her certainty, her strange sense of peace. He closed his eyes, surrendering to the pull, the inevitability of it all. He had fought against the darkness, raged against the dying of the light, but in the end, the town, the ritual, the silence, it had all consumed him, swallowed him whole. He opened his eyes to find himself in the town square, a vast open space ringed by the looming silhouettes of buildings that seemed to claw at the night sky. A bonfire raged in the center, casting grotesque shadows that danced and contorted, transforming familiar shapes into monstrous apparitions. The townsfolk formed a circle around the fire, their faces hidden by the hoods of their dark robes. He saw the young woman in the white dress, her face streaked with tears, her body trembling as she stood before the flames. The two robed figures flanked her, their masks cold and menacing in the flickering firelight. He tried to speak, to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. His voice was gone, stolen by the suffocating silence that pressed in on him from all sides. He was a ghost, a spectator trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. The chanting reached a fever pitch, a guttural roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the town. The flames of the bonfire leapt higher, their heat licking at his skin, their light burning into his eyes, searing the image of the ritual into his mind, branding him with the mark of Silent Hollow. He watched, helpless, as one of the robed figures produced a wickedly curved blade, its surface glinting in the firelight. The young woman whimpered, her eyes wide with terror, her body shaking uncontrollably. He wanted to look away, to escape the scene unfolding before him, but he couldn't tear his gaze from the gruesome spectacle. The blade flashed down, a silver arc against the backdrop of the flames. A scream died in his throat, the sound swallowed by the deafening roar of the fire and the relentless chanting of the townsfolk. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the image of the blade, the blood, the terror in the young woman's eyes was seared into his mind. When he finally opened his eyes, the square was empty. The bonfire had dwindled to smoldering embers, casting a faint, eerie glow on the surrounding buildings. The townsfolk were gone, vanished into the shadows like creatures of the night. Only the lingering scent of blood and fear remained, a testament to the horror he had witnessed. He was alone, utterly alone, trapped in a town that fed on fear and silence, bound to relive this nightmarish cycle for eternity. He had become a part of Silent Hollow, his fate intertwined with its terrible secret, his voice silenced forever by the weight of its endless night. He stumbled through the deserted streets, his senses overloaded, his mind reeling. The silence, once oppressive, now roared in his ears, a deafening reminder of the horror he had witnessed, the horror he was now inextricably bound to. The buildings loomed over him, their shadows stretching out like grasping claws, eager to drag him back into the heart of the town's darkness. Each step he took felt heavy, weighted down by the knowledge of the town's terrible secret, the endless cycle of sacrifice and silence. He had sought escape, a way out of the nightmare, but the nightmare had seeped into his very being, staining his soul with the indelible mark of Silent Hollow. The air clung to him, thick and cloying, carrying the faint scent of blood and incense, a constant reminder of the ritual, the sacrifice. He tried to outrun the smell, the memory, but it followed him relentlessly, a ghostly specter haunting his every step. The silence pressed in, suffocating him, forcing its way into his lungs, his blood, his bones. He was no longer an outsider, a traveler passing through. He was a part of Silent Hollow now, another brick in its macabre edifice, his existence woven into the fabric of its eternal night. As he stumbled through the town, he noticed a faint light flickering in the distance. It beckoned him forward, a beacon of false hope in the suffocating darkness. He knew he should resist, should turn away, but something drew him towards it, a morbid curiosity he was powerless to resist. He emerged into the town square, his heart sinking as he recognized the scene before him. The bonfire had been rekindled, its flames leaping towards the night sky, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed like demons celebrating their victory. The townsfolk were gathering, their dark robes billowing around them as they moved with an eerie synchronicity towards the flames. Their faces were hidden once more, but he could sense their eyes upon him, watching, judging, welcoming him into their ranks. He watched in numb horror as a new figure was led towards the flames. A young man this time, his eyes wide with the same terror that had gripped the young woman before him. The cycle was beginning anew, the ritual repeating itself with an inevitability that chilled him to the bone. He realized with a sickening certainty that he was not just trapped in Silent Hollow, he was trapped in its cycle, condemned to relive this nightmarish ritual for all eternity. There would be no escape, no respite, only the endless repetition of sacrifice, the deafening echo of silence. He closed his eyes, the chanting of the townsfolk washing over him, seeping into his mind, his very being. He felt himself changing, his memories fading, his sense of self dissolving into the fabric of the town. He was becoming one of them, a willing participant in the macabre dance of death that played out under Silent Hollow's watchful gaze. He opened his eyes one last time, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. The world around him seemed to shimmer, the edges blurring as if reality itself was breaking down. He saw his reflection in the flames of the bonfire, his features distorted, his eyes hollow and vacant, reflecting the emptiness that had consumed him. Then everything went dark. The chanting faded, the flames died down, and the world around him solidified, becoming still, silent, eternal. He was trapped, frozen in time, a prisoner of his own nightmare, forever bound to the town that had claimed him as its own. The camera pans out, showing the town of Silent Hollow bathed in the eerie glow of the moon. The streets are empty, the houses dark, but a sense of unseen eyes watching lingers in the air. The silence is absolute, broken only by the whisper of the wind, a silent testament to the horrors that lie hidden beneath the town's placid facade. Rain lashed down, blurring the already grim landscape. I pulled the collar of my coat tighter, the chill biting through even the thick fabric. First day, they said. Easy money, they said. They didn't mention the prison would be on an island like this, shrouded in mist and smelling of salt and fear. The ferry groaned its way back to the mainland, leaving me standing on the rain-slicked dock. My stomach churned. Not from the sea, but from the foreboding silhouette against the storm-tossed sky. The prison. The clanging of the metal gate as it closed behind me echoed in the emptiness. No turning back now. Warden's gravelly voice echoed in my head. Penitentiary X, maximum security for the worst of the worst. He hadn't needed to elaborate. Everyone knew what lurked behind these fortified walls. Creatures of nightmare, things that went bump in the night and ripped apart whatever they found. I trudged uphill, the heavy steel door at the end of the path looking more like the entrance to hell than a place of work. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself. First shift jitters. Everyone got them. Just had to get through the night, collect the paycheck. Easy. The guard at the security checkpoint, a mountain of a man with a face etched in stone, barely glanced at my ID. "New meat, huh?" he grunted, his voice raspy as if he hadn't used it in years. "Try not to get eaten alive." He chuckled humorlessly, handing me a map. "Cell Block C, your station. His eyes, cold and hard, lingered on me for a beat too long. And good luck, I didn't need it. I wasn't planning on getting close enough to anything in this place to need luck. The air inside was thick with the metallic tang of blood and something else, something primal and unsettling. The corridors were lined with steel bars, each cell holding a darkness so profound it felt like staring into the abyss. The occasional growl, guttural and chilling, sent shivers down my spine. Every instinct screamed at me to turn tail and run, but I pressed on. Cell block C. The sign hanging askew seemed to mock me. Taking another deep breath, I stepped inside. The stench hit me first, a putrid mix of decay and something sickeningly sweet. Then the sounds. Rattling chains, guttural growls, and something scraping against concrete. It took all my willpower not to drop the flashlight and run. Shadows danced in the flickering light, twisting and turning into monstrous shapes. I could feel eyes on me, watching my every move. The first cell I passed held a creature that defied description, a mass of writhing tentacles and teeth, its single eye pulsating with malevolent hunger. Further down, something vaguely humanoid, its skin flayed and muscles exposed, pounded against the bars, its roar echoing through the corridor. Each step was a descent into a nightmare, a parade of horrors that seemed ripped straight from the darkest recesses of my mind. And yet amidst the terror, a strange sense of fascination took hold. These were monsters, yes, but they were also prisoners, trapped and tormented. What crimes could they have possibly committed to deserve such a fate? Finally, I reached my station, a small fortified booth at the end of the cell block. The previous guard, a wiry man with haunted eyes, shoved a mug of lukewarm coffee into my hand. "Don't let them smell your fear," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "They can sense it." Before I could even ask what he meant, he was gone, swallowed by the shadows. Alone now, the full weight of my situation crashed down on me. I was trapped in a cage with the most dangerous creatures imaginable, responsible for their containment. The monitor flickered erratically, showing grainy images of the horrors lurking just beyond my steel cage. A low hum, almost imperceptible at first, began to resonate through the prison, setting my teeth on edge. This wasn't going to be an easy night. This was going to be a very, very long night. The coffee tasted like battery acid, but it was hot. The monitor flickered, showing cells with unspeakable horrors. A voice crackled over the intercom, startling me. "Harrigan, report to the warden's office now." The warden. A ghost story among the guards. Never seen him, only heard that voice. A voice that could silence a room. I navigated the maze of corridors. Each footstep echoed, punctuated by distant growls. The warden's office was at the end of the corridor. Taking a deep breath, I knocked. The door hissed open, revealing a dimly lit room. Behind a steel desk sat a figure shrouded in shadow. "You're late, Harrigan." I stepped inside, the door sliding shut behind me. "Sorry, sir." The warden leaned forward, the light catching his face for a fleeting moment. Scarred, weathered, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 nightmares. "This facility," he began, "houses the most dangerous creatures on Earth. Things that would make the devil himself tremble." He gestured to the blueprints on the wall. "This," he continued, "is the nerve center, the control room. One man in there can monitor every inch of this place." He fixed me with a stare. "And that man, Harrigan, is you." "Me? Alone, responsible for containing an army of nightmares? Don't worry," the warden chuckled. "We have safeguards. The creatures are tagged, monitored, controlled." He pointed to a panel on his desk. "One touch and I can fry every last one of them." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threat. He wasn't just talking about the monsters. He was talking about me. I spent hours memorizing the control panel, my head spinning with jargon. The warden warned me, "Stay vigilant, Harrigan, they can smell fear." He didn't need to tell me twice. The fear was a knot in my stomach, the hum intensified, vibrating through the floor. I focused on the monitors, creatures pacing, eyes glowing. The hum grew louder, whispering doubts. Outside a storm raged, the wind howled, rattling the bars. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just a storm, this was something sinister. Then it happened. The hum escalated into a deafening roar. Lights flickered and died, plunging the control room into darkness. The monitors went haywire, static erupting across the screens. Then the alarms. A high-pitched shriek, splitting the air, bouncing off the steel walls. Red lights flashed, bathing the room in an infernal glow. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. What the warden had warned me about. I fumbled for the emergency lights, my hands shaking. As the room flickered back to life, the intercom crackled to life. It was the warden, his voice tight with urgency. "Harrigan, report!" Before I could answer, another voice cut in, panicked, breathless. "Sir, we have multiple containment breaches. They're loose. They're all loose." The warden's voice, cold and hard, cut through the chaos. "Seal the facility. Initiate lockdown protocol Omega. Lockdown protocol Omega." The word sent a chill down my spine. I had read about it in the manual. A last-ditch effort to contain a catastrophic breach. It meant only one thing. No one was getting out of here alive. I watched in horror as the monitors flickered back to life, revealing scenes of unimaginable carnage. Creatures rampaged through the corridors, tearing through steel and concrete. The screams of the guards echoed through the speakers. On screen 4, I saw it. The massive tentacles and teeth. It latched onto a guard, its eye glowing with malevolent glee. The blood, a sickening shade of green, splattered against the camera lens, but the screams, the sickening crunching of bone, continued. I slammed my fist against the console, helpless rage coursing through me. Those were good men out there, men with families, lives, and now they were just food for these things. I had to do something. I had to help. But what? I was just one man trapped in a cage with an army of monsters. Then through the cacophony of alarms and screams, I heard it, a scratching sound coming from the other side of the steel door. Slow at first, deliberate, then faster, more insistent. Something was out there, and it was coming for me. The scratching intensified, metal screeching against metal, sending shivers down my spine. Whatever was out there, it wanted in, badly. My eyes darted around the control room, searching for a weapon, anything. But the warden had been very clear. No firearms allowed inside the facility. Too risky, he had said, in the wrong hands. He didn't need to elaborate on what he considered the wrong hands. I grabbed the heavy fire axe mounted on the wall, its blade dull but reassuringly solid. My hands trembled as I hefted it, my heart pounding against my ribs like a drum. The scratching stopped. Silence. Heavy, pregnant, terrifying, then a thud. Something heavy hitting the door. The metal buckled inward, another thud, and another. Each impact sent shockwaves through the room, echoing in the silence like the beat of a funeral drum. I knew that door wouldn't hold. Not for long. I had to get out. But where? The control room was my prison, a steel and concrete cage with no escape. The only way out was through the very door that was about to be torn down by whatever lurked on the other side. Panic surged through me, cold and clammy. I had to think, had to act. But my mind was a jumbled mess of fear and adrenaline. The monitors, still flickering erratically, offered no solutions, only glimpses of further chaos and carnage. The entire facility was a slaughterhouse, and I was next on the menu. Then I saw it, a ventilation shaft, high on the wall, almost hidden in the shadows. It wouldn't fit me, too small. But maybe Maybe it was enough. Hope, fragile but tenacious, flickered in the darkness. Grabbing a chair, I smashed the glass covering the vent, shards raining down on me. The air that wafted out was stale, thick with dust and something else, something metallic and foul. Blood? I didn't have time to hesitate. Another crash, louder this time, sent the door groaning inward. The creature was breaking through. Hauling myself up, ignoring the searing pain in my arms as I scraped against the metal edges, I squeezed into the vent. It was a tight fit, my chest constricted, darkness pressing down on me. The air was thick and suffocating, filled with the sounds of my own ragged breathing and the distant echoes of the carnage unfolding below. I could still hear the creature, its enraged roars echoing through the control room. It knew I was here somewhere in the darkness, hunting me. The ventilation shaft was a labyrinth, twisting and turning through the bowels of the prison. I crawled through the darkness, my clothes ripped, my skin scraped raw. Panic gnawed at me, fueled by the ever-present fear of the unknown. What if I got stuck? What if the creature found another way in? The screams, muffled but unmistakable, reached me even here. They were dying down there, one by one, picked off in the darkness. I couldn't let that happen to me. I had to keep moving, had to find a way out. The vent deposited me into a maintenance closet, a small windowless room stacked high with cleaning supplies and spare parts. The stench of bleach and disinfectant hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the coppery tang of blood that permeated the rest of the facility. I collapsed on the floor, my chest heaving, my muscles screaming in protest. Silence. For a moment there was only silence, broken only by the pounding of my own heart. Then, through the thin walls, I heard it. Movement. Heavy footsteps, accompanied by the clinking of chains and the guttural growls that had become the soundtrack to my worst nightmare. They were close. Too close. Peeking through a crack in the door, my blood ran cold. It was Cell Block B, the section housing the most dangerous inmates, the ones even the warden spoke of in hushed whispers. And it was a scene of absolute carnage. The corridor was littered with bodies, torn and mangled beyond recognition. Blood, a grotesque tapestry of crimson and black, painted the walls and floor. The air reeked of death and something else, something ancient and evil. But it was the creatures themselves that froze the blood in my veins. They were unlike anything I could have imagined, even in my wildest nightmares. Grotesque mockeries of life, twisted and mutated by some unseen force. Two of them, their forms illuminated by flickering emergency lights, were tearing into the remains of a guard, their guttural growls echoing in the otherwise silent corridor. I didn't dare breathe, didn't dare move a muscle. If they sensed me. I forced myself to look away from the carnage, my stomach churning. This was no longer a prison break, this was a massacre, and I was trapped in the middle of it. I had to get out. But every instinct screamed at me to stay hidden, to not attract attention. Crouching low, I edged along the wall, my back pressed against the cold concrete. The stench of death was overpowering, the silence broken only by the sickening crunch of bone. Each step was an exercise in controlled terror, my senses on high alert. I could feel their eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. Their presence, heavy and malevolent, filled the corridor. Then I saw it. A shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, moving silently at the edge of my vision. It wasn't one of the creatures I had seen before. This was something else. The shadow paused, its attention seemingly drawn to something further down the corridor. It was my chance, my one and only chance. Slipping past the maintenance closet, I risked a glance back. The shadow was gone, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, remained. I had to get out of this corridor, had to find somewhere, anywhere to hide. My eyes darted around, searching for a way out, an escape route, and then I saw it. At the very end of the corridor, a single door stood ajar, a sliver of light emanating from within. Hope, flickering like a candle in the wind, surged through me. It was a long shot, suicide even. But what choice did I have? It was either that or stay here and become another victim in this nightmare. Taking a deep breath, I ran. The door creaked open, revealing a small dusty office. Papers scattered, furniture overturned, as if someone had left in a hurry. A single flickering bulb drew me in like a moth to a flame. It was a beacon of hope in this nightmare. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing. My hand trembled as I fumbled for the lock. It would have to do, for now I was safe, relatively safe. The air was thick with dust and decay. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I was alive, for now. My eyes darted around, searching for any clue. A nameplate on the desk caught my eye. Dr. Emily Carter, Chief Research Officer, Research. What kind of research was being conducted in this hellhole? I shuddered to think. Drawers hung open, their contents spilled across the floor. Files, reports, photographs, all stamped with the same ominous logo. Penitentiary X. I picked up a photograph, my breath catching in my throat. It was a picture of a young woman, her smile bright, her eyes filled with intelligence and a hint of sadness. Dr. Carter. This must have been her office. Where was she now? Another victim claimed by this night of horrors? A faint scratching sound coming from the corner of the room sent a chill down my spine. It was followed by a low moan, barely audible, yet filled with an unspeakable sadness that sent shivers down my spine. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, the fire axe heavy in my grip. But there was nothing there. Just shadows dancing in the flickering light, or were they? Driven by a morbid curiosity, I cautiously approached the source of the sound. It was a ventilation duct, its cover ripped off. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The air seemed to crackle with a strange energy. It was then that I noticed it. A faint musky odor, the same scent I had detected in the corridor, the shadow that had stalked me. It was stronger here. This was a lair. The scratching sound came again, followed by a low growl. Fear surged through me. I was not alone. Whatever had created this carnage was here, and it was close. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the ventilation duct, my mind racing. What was I going to do? I was trapped, a fly caught in the web of a spider. The scratching grew more insistent, accompanied by the scraping of claws against metal. It was trying to get out. Then, with a deafening roar, the creature exploded out of the duct, its massive form filling the small office. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, a grotesque parody of life, a nightmare given form. Its skin was a patchwork of scales and scarred flesh, stretched taut over bulging muscles. Its eyes, glowing with a malevolent intelligence, fixed on me, and a low growl rumbled deep within its chest. I was paralyzed with fear, my mind screaming at me to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there like a deer caught in the headlights. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my body frozen in terror, my mind struggling to comprehend the sheer horror of what stood before me. The creature took a step towards me, its claws scraping against the floor, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. Saliva dripped from its jaws, a viscous fluid that sizzled and smoked as it hit the floor. I knew I had to do something, anything, to break free from the grip of fear that held me captive. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything, and then I saw it. The fire extinguisher. It was mounted on the wall, next to the door, a beacon of hope in the face of unimaginable terror. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged for it, my fingers closing around the cold metal. The creature roared again, its eyes burning into me, and lunged. I squeezed the handle, aiming the nozzle at its face, praying that this desperate act of defiance would be enough. The extinguisher hissed, spewing a cloud of white foam that momentarily obscured the creature from view. But I could still hear it, its enraged roars echoing through the small office. The foam dissipated, revealing the creature, momentarily blinded and disoriented. But it was still standing. It shook its head, its eyes glowing red with rage, and charged. I threw the empty extinguisher at it, the metal canister bouncing harmlessly off its thick hide. It was on me in an instant, its claws raking at my chest, tearing through my clothes, through flesh and bone. I screamed, the sound lost in the cacophony of the creature's roars and the sickening crunch of my own bones breaking. I was thrown against the wall, the air knocked out of me, pain exploding through my body. I lay there, crumpled on the floor, my vision blurring, my lifeblood staining the dusty floorboards. Through the haze of pain, I saw it looming over me, its eyes burning with a cold, predatory hunger. It was going to finish me off. I closed my eyes, accepting my fate. It was over. But then something unexpected happened. A high-pitched whine, growing louder by the second, cut through the creature's victory growl. It turned its head, momentarily distracted, its attention drawn to the source of the sound. I forced myself to look. It was coming from the ventilation duct, the same duct the creature had emerged from. The whine escalated into a deafening screech, the air shimmering with an unseen energy. And then a blinding flash of light. I shielded my eyes, the sound of the creature's enraged roar echoing in my ears. When I could see again, the office was empty. The creature was gone. All that remained was the lingering smell of ozone and a faint shimmering residue hanging in the air. I lay there, my body battered and broken, my mind reeling from the encounter. What had just happened? What was that light? And where had the creature gone? I struggled to my feet, my body screaming in protest, and stumbled towards the door. I had to get out of here, had to find somewhere safe. But as I reached for the handle, I realized with a sickening feeling that it wouldn't turn. The door was locked. I rattled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Panic welled up inside me, threatening to overwhelm me. I was trapped in this office with no way out, no way to defend myself if the creature returned. The scratching sound started again, faint at first, then growing louder. It was coming from the ventilation duct. The creature was coming back. I was running out of time. Claustrophobia tightened its grip. Walls seemed to close in, the air growing thin and stale. The scratching at the vent intensified, a maddening counterpoint to the panicked beat of my own heart. Think, Harrigan, think. There had to be another way out. Every instinct screamed at me to smash a window, break down the door, anything to escape the confines of the office. But reason, a fragile thing in the face of such primal fear, reminded me that this was a maximum security prison. There wouldn't be any easy escapes. I tore through the office, overturning furniture, ripping down shelves, searching for another way out. A trapdoor, a hidden passage, anything, nothing. The scratching stopped. Silence. Even more terrifying than the incessant noise. It meant the creature had broken through. It was in the ventilation system somewhere above me, and it was only a matter of time before it found another way into the office. I had to think fast. My eyes fell on the ventilation duct, the metal twisted and torn where the creature had emerged. It was a long shot, suicide maybe, but it was the only option I had left. If I could climb inside, maybe, just maybe, I could navigate the ventilation system, find another way out of this nightmare. Taking a deep breath, steeling myself against the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me, I grabbed the fire axe and began to widen the opening of the duct. Metal shrieked against metal, sending sparks flying into the darkness. The air, thick with the stench of the creature, seemed to grow colder, as if I were disturbing a tomb. Each clang of the axe echoed through the ventilation system, a beacon in the darkness, announcing my presence to whatever lurked within. But I had no choice. It was this, or become another victim in the creature's gruesome game of cat and mouse. The opening was just wide enough for me to squeeze through. Taking a deep breath, I hoisted myself up, the metal biting into my hands. The air inside was stale and suffocating, filled with the dust of ages and the lingering stench of the creature. I gagged, fighting the urge to vomit, but forced myself to push onward. The duct was a tight fit, claustrophobia pressing down on me from all sides. I could feel the weight of the prison above me, hear the distant echoes of the carnage below. Every creak and groan of the metal sent shivers down my spine, my every sense on high alert for any sign of the creature. Time lost all meaning as I crawled through the darkness, the fire axe my only companion. The duct twisted and turned, a labyrinth designed to trap and torment. I was lost, but I had to keep moving. To stop was to surrender to the darkness, to the horrors that awaited me. The air grew noticeably colder, the metallic tang of blood replaced by a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. The duct opened into a larger chamber, the air thick with an unnatural luminescence. I peered cautiously over the edge. The chamber was unlike anything I'd ever seen, a grotesque cathedral dedicated to some ancient, unknowable evil. Strange symbols and markings, glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light, covered the walls. In the center of the chamber, a pulsating mass of flesh and bone, tentacles writhing, emitted a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. This was the source of the prison's corruption, the heart of the nightmare, and I was trapped inside it. A low growl, guttural and primal, echoed through the chamber, sending shivers down my spine. I didn't need to see it to know that I was no longer alone. The creature was here, somewhere in the darkness, its presence a palpable weight pressing down on me. I turned, my back against the cold metal of the duct, the fire axe raised in a futile attempt at defense. The creature emerged from the shadows, its eyes burning with a cold, predatory hunger. It was even more grotesque than I remembered. Its flesh a tapestry of scars and mutations, its claws like razors glinting in the otherworldly light. "Come on, you bastard," I roared, my voice a mixture of fear and defiance. "Let's finish this." The creature hesitated, its head cocked to one side as if studying me, a low growl rumbling in its chest. For a moment our eyes locked, predator and prey, and in that moment I saw something flicker in its gaze. Not fear, but something else. Recognition, understanding. And then it lunged. The creature lunged, a blur of teeth and claws, and I barely had time to raise the fire axe in defense. The impact shuddered through my arms, the metal groaning under the monstrous force. I gritted my teeth, pushing back against the onslaught, adrenaline erasing the pain in my battered body. For a brief, terrifying moment, we were locked in a deadly embrace, the fate of the prison, perhaps the world, hanging in the balance. But the creature was stronger, faster, driven by an insatiable hunger. It slammed into me again, knocking me off balance. I stumbled back, my boots slipping on the slick floor, the fire axe falling from my grasp with a clatter that echoed through the chamber. Despair threatened to engulf me. I was unarmed, outmatched, and utterly alone in the heart of this nightmare. The creature moved in for the kill, a low growl rumbling in its chest, its eyes burning with a cold, predatory hunger. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But the killing blow never came. Instead, a high-pitched whine, growing louder by the second, cut through the creature's victory growl. It turned its head, momentarily distracted, its attention drawn back to the ventilation duct. The same eerie, otherworldly light I had seen before pulsed from within the shaft, bathing the chamber in an unnatural glow. The creature roared, a sound filled with pain and fury, and retreated a few steps. It was my chance, my one and only chance. Scrambling back, I snatched up the discarded fire axe and ran, not towards the creature, but towards the source of the light, towards the ventilation duct, the only way out of this infernal chamber. The creature hesitated, its attention torn between the pulsing light and its escaped prey. The whine escalated into a deafening screech, the air shimmering with an unseen energy. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, I leaped into the ventilation duct, the metal biting into my hands as I hauled myself up and into the darkness. The duct was even tighter than before, claustrophobia a living thing pressing down on me. But fear lent me strength, driving me forward through the darkness. Behind me, I could hear the creature's enraged roars echoing through the ventilation system. It was still hunting me. The air grew colder, fresher, and the creature's roars faded behind me. Was I finally escaping this nightmare? The duct deposited me into what appeared to be another maintenance closet, this one thankfully empty. I collapsed on the cold concrete floor, gasping for breath. I stepped out into the corridor, the fire axe still clutched in my hand. But the corridor was empty, silent. But where had I escaped